Hi, welcome to the Santa Fe Reporters Candidate Chat. I'm editor Julianne Grimm, and today I'm here with Congressman Ben Ray Luján and Jeff Byrd, who's challenging him in the upcoming general election. So Ben Ray is from Nambe, and he's a Democrat, and Jeff is a Republican who's from Tucumcari, and we're going to get started right away. So Jeff, you lost to Ben when you ran against him in 2012. And I want to know what it is about the job he's doing. What's so bad about it that's made you come back and try again?
You know, here in northern New Mexico, we're losing jobs at a phenomenal rate. We're having federal agencies that are impacting ranchers and oil and gas industry. We have decisions being made that are hurting small businesses across the district. The Obamacare is hurting us at every level of business, from the small mom and pops all the way up to the big corporations. We just recently heard that Walmart is cutting their employees to under 30 hours a week because of the additional cost that they're facing because of Obamacare. That affects my business too, as a small proprietor here in New Mexico. And we have to make those changes. And then you have the federal agencies, the BLM, the Forest Service, the Fish and Game, the Army Corps of Engineers, the EPA, that are also making regulations that are hurting businesses and hurting communities here in New Mexico. And as a former environmental engineer, I know that we can make changes here in New Mexico that will protect the environment but also protect our jobs.
So Ben Ray, how are the district residents better off with you as their representative in Congress?
Well, one of the things that I pride myself on, not only being born and raised and educated in the district in New Mexico, is the time that we spend, especially with casework, with constituent services. I have one of the largest caseloads in the country. I have the largest caseload in New Mexico, even stronger than some of our senators as well. And the reason for that is I learned from my father, learning from Manuel Luján, the work that Heather Wilson did as well, Steve Schiff, Bill Richardson, when they talked about the importance of constituent services when they were serving in Congress. They went out into the community. They worked with community members. I have a strong caseload, but about a third of it is helping veterans as well. So we work on Social Security cases. We work with veterans to make sure that they have the benefits that they've earned. Sadly, sometimes the bureaucracy gets in the way, messes up their paperwork. Not only do they not get the medals that they should have been awarded, but it hurts them with their compensation month to month. We've actually been able to fix bureaucracy where there were people waiting for medical procedures, life-saving medical procedures that were caught up in Denver or in some other office, where we were able to work through the weekend, get responses to the physician that was going to postpone even a liver transplant, and get things happening. So there's small things that you can do that make a difference in people's lives that you'll never read about, but that make a difference in people's lives. And so it's that, plus my connection to the district. I'm, again, proud of the family I was raised in, the importance of hard work, traveling around, and I just love this beautiful place that we call home.
Ben Ray, you've said that the United States has a leading role to play in the global community. You talk about this role in humanitarian crisis and in what you described as threats to national security. But then you've also said that you don't support boots on the ground in Syria, sending troops to Syria. What can you say about that apparent contradiction?
Well, I don't think it's a contradiction at all. There's many that share this feeling, and as you look at what's happening around the world, going back to President Kennedy with the enactment of the Peace Corps, we have a responsibility to make sure that we're using soft power, going out around the world to be able to work with one another. And that's why the Peace Corps and Peace Corps volunteers are so strong and amazing. But when it comes to conflict as well, we should not forget that when we went into Iraq and Afghanistan under President George W. Bush, under the guise of weapons of mass destruction, that it was a lie. And it's been proven to be a lie. That's why I was so adamantly opposed to what was happening out that way, why I advocated to get our troops home as quickly and safely as possible. When I actually went out to visit our troops, we had a sit down with General McChrystal, where what he shared with us as members of Congress was different than what came out in a London interview about 5 months later. And going to ISIS, I've supported the president with what he's doing with airstrikes and moving out that way. But with the briefings that we've received, which suggested that our allies would be at the table, Turkey and others providing support, even the UK, when they took a vote, suggested that they would go into Iraq and not into Syria. Turkey has been reluctant and hesitant all along. It just doesn't seem that the evidence was there associated with the United States taking all of the burden and responsibility. This is a global effort, and everybody needs to have skin in the game, especially the Iraqis as well. And I think that's why it's important as we look at who's going to be on the ground. I don't want American troops on the ground at this point, and it doesn't seem that the testimony that we've received, the briefings that we've received, or the conversations that have taken place over the last few weeks even, have yet to support that.
Jeff, you have a different perspective about our role in foreign policy and about the Syria issue in particular. Am I right?
Well, somewhat. I agree with the congressman. Nobody should be anxious to go to war. That's something that nobody wants to do. But we have to make sure that we're addressing the issue directly and head on. The move to leave Iraq led to the problem we're dealing with now. We clearly didn't learn from Germany. We had World War I, and then we had to have World War II because we didn't alleviate the problem. We didn't secure Germany at the time in World War I. And this is what's happened in Iraq. We've left it open when the government is still weak and not exactly firm and has a good grasp of the situation there in Iraq. And it's led to ISIS being able to move in and undermine the government that we had tried to leave in place. We shouldn't have left Iraq. Having said that, we did. Those are decisions in the past. Now we have to make sure that we stop this advancement from ISIS. We hear just yesterday in the news that ISIS was able to take over a warehouse that had some chemical warheads in it. You know, and they have stated desires to destroy Israel, to wipe out Western civilization. I believe that that is their desire, and I have no reason to doubt them. I believe that people say what they mean, and they're going to act on those views. And so I support the president and what he's doing in the bombing, and I think that the current actions need to be strong enough to ensure that this advancement stops, and it hasn't stopped. And if we need to take more actions, then that's what needs to be done.
Does that mean troops on the ground in Syria?
You know, I am one that, at this point, this is when politics and politicians get out of the way and we allow the generals to do what they need. If the generals say we need to get boots on the ground, then we just supply the necessary funding that they can get that done. If they think they continue to do it with airstrikes that will manage the situation, then we do that. But as a congressman, political powers have one role, and that's to fund the army. The decision to go to war had to be made. It's been made that we're going to take action against ISIS. And so the actions just need to be supporting whatever the generals need to get the job done on the ground as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
Can we talk about it just a little bit? The Constitution prescribes that the Congress has to weigh in when it comes to war and war declaration. And I think especially what we saw with Iraq when President Bush, Vice President Cheney, Scooter Libby lied to the American people about weapons of mass destruction being in Iraq at the time that Osama bin Laden was said to be in Afghanistan and then later into Pakistan, that's why the Congress needs to weigh in, to authorize war as well. And that has not taken place. That's why it's so important that we have balances in our government, checks and balances that keep an eye on one another. And this is another area where the Congress needs to weigh in. It was embarrassing that Speaker Boehner recessed the Congress the earliest since 1960, when we should have stayed to have a thorough debate and conversation on this.
Do you disagree with that?
Well, I take exception to him saying that Bush lied. 98 out of 100 senators agreed and voted for the action that was taken to go into Afghanistan and Iraq. So they all lied because they all saw the same information, or the information they had available at the time was justifiable, and so it was easy to get everybody to vote on that side. There wasn't any dissension. There was one person who chose not to vote. But that means either they all lied and we give them all blame, or the information available at the time was accurate as they felt it could be.
Now we're getting into areas where we disagree.
And many members of the House oppose that as well. So it's not just the Senate. Two branches of government, many members in the House, including Senator Udall, voted against it.
One branch of government, two houses, House of Representatives and Senate.
We're going to move on to a different topic. Dissension is a great word because that's a word that comes up a lot when we're talking about the issue of climate change. So I know that you've been quoted in other places, Jeff, saying that you believe climate change is a myth.
Absolutely.
You've also talked about being in favor of increasing fuel production in the U.S.
Yes.
and also dismantling the EPA.
Absolutely.
So I'm a little curious about what you think people in Santa Fe's reaction to those perspectives are, and why you'd like them to agree with your perspective on that.
Well, climate change may be occurring. What I take exception to is the fact that there's a consensus among scientists. As a scientist, there's not a consensus. There's hypotheses, theories, and facts. A scientist may believe it's possible that man is causing global climate change, but they won't agree to it. The 97% number that President Obama and Ben Ray has been using, even that number is under question. It comes from the University of Queensland in Australia. And if you ask them for how they came to that number, they are offering litigation against anybody who challenges their scientific methodology to come up with the 97%. On Wikipedia, recently, 75% of scientists agree that it may be, but they don't know. And I'll agree with that. It may be caused. But that's why we got to continue to do research into this issue. This is a huge issue, and it can't be solved in a 30-second soundbite. We have to deal with this in a serious manner. Remember what happened whenever we decided that chlorofluorocarbons were causing the hole in the ozone. We got the technology to measure the ozone layer and to see the thickness, and we found that there was a hole over the Antarctic, and we all panicked thinking that we're going to destroy our atmosphere. We quickly eliminated chlorofluorocarbons, which is what was a chemical used to make the shields on the space shuttle. That's what R12 was made out of, and it was what we used in hairspray and other propellants and cans. Congress quickly reacted, and we got rid of R12, and we changed that system of how we make fireproofing. It resulted in the death of astronauts. And then it turns out, as we continue to measure, that the upper level ozone layer actually aspirates. That hole opens and closes, and it has nothing to do with chlorofluorocarbons. So we can't act rashly. We have to make sure that science is actually allowed to work. There's plenty of organizations, and there's tons of evidence that shows that it isn't man-caused, but it's naturally occurring. So we have to be able to allow the scientists to do their job and not project an opinion on them.
Are you getting a lot of pushback on that from people, particularly in our city, which I know is just one part of the district?
No, I'm not, because the majority of Americans realize that the science is not settled.
Ben Ray, when you were among the folks in Washington who have talked about responding to climate change, but we're not really on the ground here seeing a lot from Washington that's changing things here on that front. Can you talk a little bit about why you haven't taken a stronger position, not just to reduce our nation's dependence on foreign oil, but to reduce our dependence on oil, period?
Oh, I think that's inaccurate. But quickly, Jeff has talked about getting rid of the Department of Education because he doesn't believe that the federal government should have a role in education. He suggested getting rid of the EPA as well. And it sounds like now he wants to get rid of NASA. NASA as well, Jeff, some of the brightest minds that we have in the United States.
Oh, don't be projecting your opinions on me. I will speak to NASA if that question's asked. Thank you.
And so NASA, as I was saying, has done an amazing job researching climate change. And NASA believes that warming is taking place as well. I'd encourage you to go to the NASA website and just take a look. Some amazing information, and everyone to go and take a look at what's happening.
Let me just redirect you to the
Sure.
one part of the question that I really care about as
sure.
someone who's driving and living here. What can you do to get us off of oil? What are you doing to get us off of oil?
So the work that I've been doing, in addition to bringing attention that climate change is real, and the first thing that Congress has to do to be able to take this problem on is to admit that it's happening. Sadly, we still have people around the country, like my opponent, who say that it's a lie, it's a farce, it's made up, it's not true. When I was on the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission, I led an effort to increase New Mexico's renewable portfolio standard, developing more renewables here in the state of New Mexico. When I went to the Congress, I also introduced legislation to establish a national renewable electricity standard. I've stood firm on protecting production tax credits, which 2 years ago my opponent was critical of. That means generating more power from wind and sun, especially right here in New Mexico as well. I've led an effort with Congressman Peter Welch to introduce energy efficiency legislation and have joined efforts with people like Henry Waxman, where members of Congress early on, we agreed to be on the floor every day to talk about climate change and global warming so that the country would not stop talking about it. And so I've been leading an effort every step of the way in those areas, in addition to supporting hydrogen research at Los Alamos National Laboratories when the administration was pushing back against that. As we talk about alternatives to what we can be doing with our vehicles, I've also supported efforts by the administration to increase the fuel efficiency in our vehicles as well. And I've been a leading advocate in those areas. So again, I'd ask people to go back and look at my record in those areas as well and make sure that they see the legislation I've been advocating for. And also, I think it's important as we talk about energy production. One thing that my Republican colleagues don't like to admit is that for the first time in almost 25 years, the United States is poised to take over Saudi Arabia when it comes to oil and gas production, even in the United States. So this notion that under President Obama that hasn't been happening is simply not true. We just have to look at the facts, and I hope that we can have an honest conversation about the facts.
I want to take a moment to defend his record on that. He has been promoting green energy and energy of the future. He talks about it all the time. And I think that is undeniable that he has been doing that. But at the same time, he has neglected the oil and gas field here in New Mexico. He mentioned that we are moving forward, and it's because of technologies like fracking that has allowed us to produce more energy from the wells we have available. But here in New Mexico, where 43% of the land is owned by federal government, and they have been preventing us from doing drilling in New Mexico on those federal lands, that is why New Mexico is losing almost 3,000 jobs, 3,500 jobs from San Juan County alone. Those people have to go to Texas, where they have predominantly private property, where they've had to go to North Dakota and South Dakota, where they have predominantly private property. So we need to be expanding that field here in New Mexico, and we need to be doing it on federal lands, because the reality is that is a large percentage of New Mexico's land is federal. And so for us to get those jobs here, we have to be able to use federal lands, multi-use. We want to be able to use our lands that best benefits the economy, the state, and the people that live here by expanding what is going on. And we want to do it in a manner that is judicious. We want to make sure that we are protecting the environment, because the fact of the matter is we live here, we love this country, we're born and raised, our families are growing up here, we're really praying that our families continue to live here. And so we can't just go out there and let big industry destroy things, because it's been shown in the past that they will do that unless you regulate them. And so we have to regulate them, and as an environmental engineer, I know we can do it here in America.
But that's another example where the rhetoric doesn't match the facts. In New Mexico, there's tens of thousands of acres that are currently permitted and leased that are not currently under production. There's hundreds of permits that have been issued on federal lands as well that are currently not being used. So again, there's more that's already been issued as opposed to what's in production in New Mexico today on federal lands and even on tribal lands.
What do you think about that?
There's two issues. One of those is a state issue, and that's the pit rules that's preventing some drilling here in northern New Mexico. But permits on lands that aren't going to have producing wells, no company is interested in spending millions of dollars to sink a hole in an area that's going to have limited production. That's not going to be allowed to do fracking. We have county governments that are limiting drilling in certain areas where we could be drilling and providing jobs and bolstering the economy in those areas. So some of that is a state issue that has to be dealt with your state senators and state representatives and the governor that need to make changes.
I'm glad you brought up county. I'm sorry, are you finished?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I want to switch to a different topic, because we know that those web viewers out there are not going to stick with us forever here. So let's talk about a different kind of well and a different kind of county situation. Ben Ray, you have been really involved, and I think are proud of your role in Amit and the settlement there. Can you talk about that? Give people a little Cliff Notes version of what's happening and why you think it's the right thing?
Sure. So over the last 60 years, there's been a lawsuit that has been filed based on New Mexico water law, going back to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, where New Mexico water law is different than it is in most parts of the country, maybe in all parts of the country, where it's first in time, first in right. There's also United States Supreme Court decisions associated with tribal water versus non-tribal users with water. So going into New Mexico with some of the court renderings, I was really worried that based on court renderings and New Mexico's jurisdiction associated with first in time, first in right, that when there would be a notion where drought's hitting us and there'd be priority calls, and what a priority call is that whoever has the most senior water right, when that is called into question, they get the water and everyone else can't use water. So what I envisioned was Milagro Beanfield War, a film that was filmed up in Truchas, New Mexico. Robert Redford put the film together. And we'll remember that one of the scenes in the area where a gentleman was trying to produce some beans on a barren piece of land that he once gardened is that the water would run through the acequia, but they wouldn't be allowed to use the water. I didn't want to see that happen in New Mexico. Under some of the state engineers' renderings as well, some of the people that have built homes and dug wells after 1982 are not even supposed to be using water outside to water trees or grass or raise their animals. That's not our way of life. And so one of the aspects with the settlement would be to allow people to water outside, raise their animals as well, and to try to find a negotiated settlement so that we'd be able to preserve and protect our way of life. What Jeff has been out there saying is that we're grabbing water and taking water away from people. This is part of a process that was advocated by the County of Santa Fe, the City of Santa Fe, some local water users as well, the state engineer, the state of New Mexico, and then working with other interested parties. Part of the process also includes an objection process to elements of the settlement so that it can be revised under a federal judge. And that's what's going on right now. Many of the objections that have come forward, I support. I think that there's validity to some of what's been brought by our constituents and our neighbors as well. And that's why I've weighed in, not only through letters, but also with the County of Santa Fe, with the governing board. One of the misconceptions that's been spread, and also spread by my opponent, is that there'd be a governing water board that would be governed by 4 tribes and 1 non-tribal member. That's not true. And I've advocated with the county and with the community as well that there should be a 9 or 11 member body so that there's population representation with a tie-breaking vote going to the county or to the state engineer, for example. So we're still working through this process to make sure that we can live in this community. I have 2 acequias flowing through the land that I live in. I have a shared well with my mom. I have many aunts and uncles who live out in El Rancho and Poaque and Ombet. I'm not going to do something that's going to hurt my family. And so we're continuing to work with this and visit with neighbors, even those that have objected and that have been critical. I've sat down and they've been kind enough to invite me into their home, where over coffee we've been able to talk, and we're working together now. So again, there's a lot of concerns going forward, but we need to continue to work to make sure we keep neighbors together, but in a way that people aren't going to be shut out from water in the future. And that's what I was worried about, is that the court rendering and the law would hurt non-tribal water users, and that's not the case.
Do you think that the expansion of public water service by Santa Fe County to comply with the settlement is going to open the door for development that wouldn't have taken place absent the settlement?
Well, that's why we need to work closely with the county. When we have elected county commissioners, whether there's water expansion or not, you have to work with the county on local land use policies, land ordinances, and cases that come before them every day. The county approves and rejects development every day. And I think that's why it's so important for us to be involved with our county elected officials, and in this case with Santa Fe County elected officials. And that's where it's great to see that Santa Fe County residents are very active and are very much in agreement that we should participate in that process.
So Jeff, you have some big problems with the Amet settlement. Tell us what you feel like is at stake and what the problem is.
Well, there's a number of problems within this piece of legislation. One of them being that there's a water system that's supposed to be developed that will cover 1,500 homes. Well, there's 3,000 homes in this region that are impacted. So the 1,500 that are outside of that water system are looking at how we're going to get our water, and that's a big concern. The other thing is that in 1977, Supreme Court Justice Brandeis said in New Mexico versus the U.S. that 1, water is a property right and therefore falls under the constitutional protections of property rights, and that 2, it's a state issue. And so for the federal government to get involved is somewhat violating that judgment that came out in 1977. But then further, he said that some people have agreed to the system. That's true. 138 people have signed on to get into the system, but there's still a remaining almost 2,900 people that haven't got on the system. And there's been 500 unique dissenters to the decision from that region because they are being impacted by this decision. You take somebody's water away. If you can't get water from your faucet at your house, all of a sudden your house isn't worth a bit because nobody wants to live in a house without water. So water is a big issue in New Mexico. There's no doubt about it. There's other problems with this, is that the county of Santa Fe had a resolution that they would never ask Taos and the top of the world aquifer to transfer water rights down here, and in this settlement they transferred water rights from top of the water down here. So it violates a resolution that was already in place. We violated Supreme Court law, and we're taking people's private property rights away. It's a serious issue, and there's no doubt about it here in New Mexico, from Clovis, Las Vegas, right here in northern Santa Fe County, Taos, Gallup, Rio Rancho, Cuba. It doesn't matter where you go in New Mexico, we have serious concerns about water, and it has to be dealt with. But there are problems with this settlement that are impacting people's private property rights, and that has to be dealt with quickly.
So this case has been lingering in the court system since the 60s. What do you think the federal government ought to do to get it over with here?
I think our state engineer's office and our state elected officials need to get down and actually solve the problem. this is a problem at home, and they need to be solving it here at home. The state engineer's office, in my opinion, has been derelict in duty. You know, they have done things over the years that just make no sense, and I think that's part of the problem with that office. You have a person who's a lawyer and also an engineer, and they're only good at one side or the other, and they don't get the full picture. And so they make decisions that aren't necessarily, one, geologically sound, or maybe not legally sound, because you're asking one person to look at a broad spectrum of stuff, and we need to have a group of people who will represent all people involved. You know, either we all walk away from the negotiations a little bit mad, or everybody walks away happy. But if it's one-sided, then it isn't right, and you end up with this dissension and people bickering at each other. We know that the Pueblo leaders are upset because we're going to have this water system, but we don't have any way of bringing that across their land, and they want to know that their easements are protected and their property rights are protected, the Pueblo rights are protected, and so there's still a lot of issues to deal with, and the sad fact is this is going to remain in court for years to come, and I wish we could get it solved, and we need to be able to get leadership who will sit down and actually start working on that.
In a couple of your answers, I hear some words that make me think your philosophy really leans toward the libertarian viewpoint. Do you agree with that, or do you hear that a lot as you're out there talking to potential voters?
Well, I'm a constitutionalist. I believe that there was enumerated powers given to the federal government by the Constitution, and that all other authority remains with the states. And so I'm not libertarian in that we all run amok, but I would rather my state representative have the power to do what is necessary in education and environmental protection, in tax collection, because I know where he lives. I know his kids go to school where my kids go to school. I know that they are concerned about the environment because they are living here in the environment. I have more faith in the people that live around me in my state than I do in some bureaucrat from DC. And so that's why I always say let's push that down to a state level. That's a state issue, and let's get it dealt with where we are working as neighbors and friends, and we're all living in here. We have to live with the decisions that are made and not come from people that don't live here.
Okay. Well, I'm ready for my last question for both of you. I looked up this morning the salary that congresswomen earn. It's $174,000. That's for 1 year. What are you doing in Washington that's worth 5 times more than what a public school teacher earns?
You know, public school teachers need to be rewarded for their work as well. And I've advocated for increases with salary for teachers as well. Since I've been in Congress, I've also voted to freeze pay many, many times. Look, I wasn't part of whatever the salary creation was when Congress was debating those rules. It happened before I was there. I do know that I traveled the district extensively, though, and it's a lot of work. And not to justify the salary, but to justify the honor it is to serve the people of the community as well. And that's something that I take with me every day. I'm proud that I live in the community, that I go to church in the community, that I go to the grocery stores in the community, that I go watch local high school football in the community, that we raise sheep and we water those pastures in the community as well. But there needs to be some serious debates associated with equality across the country. And teachers, again, are pushed to the bottom. Getting rid of the Department of Education has an impact. It cuts access to funding for pre-K programs, Title I programs that we're dependent on in New Mexico, access to Pell Grants, college affordability as well. And even in New Mexico, when under Governor Martinez, we had a mistake that was made associated with funding for IDEA, the Individuals with Disability Education Act. We've lost tens of millions of dollars from the federal government because of that mistake. We need to fix those issues. Again, but bring attention to the fact that there's income inequality in New Mexico and that we need to do better by them as well. But you know, hopefully we'll continue to see pay freezes in the Congress. I'll never vote for a pay increase while I'm there. And we're going to continue to work as hard as we can, making sure that we're able to get around the district and represent the community to the best of our abilities. And as my dad taught me, that you come home and that you explain your votes to people, especially those that don't agree with you, because you can't just walk out on people that don't agree with you. You have to sit there and listen to them and talk to them as well. That's why I pride myself on traveling almost 100,000 miles since I've been elected, almost 300 events that are just Congress on your corners, town halls, meetings with constituents as well. And again, one of the largest caseloads in the country, and definitely the largest caseload in New Mexico. So we're going to continue to work to advocate the best we can for the people here at home, and that's why we're asking them for their consideration so that I could earn their vote, and just especially to encourage people to get out and vote. We need to get more people voting in New Mexico as a whole.
I certainly agree with you on that point.
As do I.
Great. We all agree on something. Let's write that down. So same question for you, really, only that you're not in Congress yet. So what is it that you think you're going to do in Congress to earn $174,000 salary?
You know, this is one place where I will not belittle the efforts of those who are representing us in Washington. They put a lot of time, money, and effort away from their families to be out there doing what they believe is right for the people that they represent. And so, is that a pretty hefty salary for us here in New Mexico? Absolutely. My wife is a teacher. I get that. But the reality is, you're now living in two places. And cost of living in D.C. is not cheap. And so that has to be accounted for. So again, I will not attack on what they get paid. I think that if they can't do their job, they shouldn't get paid. And the votes he makes to freeze salaries and to freeze pay, I think, is absolutely right. If they weren't willing to do the job, then let's not get paid for it. You know, he talked about walking out on voters. I did not walk out on voters. I walked out on a league because they were unwilling to let me talk to the voters. I engaged them. We have tons of documentation where we asked them for parity to show us how that process was not going to be biased. Unlike our congressman who wouldn't even return a call from the forum in Rio Rancho. Those are also voters in this district. We were ready to go to that forum. So we engaged, he disengaged. We have to make that change. I'm willing to talk to voters, but I'm not going to have that process biased by someone looking over the questions and changing them. Mm-hmm. And so I will talk to the voters anytime, any place. I give out my phone number on radio all the time, and people call me and we have a discussion. They're usually surprised that it's actually my phone. We did a robocall last night. My phone number was the one that went out because it was me giving the message. So we have to change what is going on in New Mexico. We have to get leadership that's willing to make tough decisions, like walking out whenever there's someone getting between you and the voter. That is a tough decision to make, but it's got to be done. And I'm willing to make tough decisions, and I'll keep moving forward in that way.
Okay. Well, everyone who's watching, the general election ballots are last going to be counted on November 4th, but early voting is already going on. So we hope if you haven't done so that you make plans to make your voice heard. This is just one of several races that are hotly contested in our region, so make sure that you count.